Hi, my name is Sharon Friedner, and I'm the Associate Director of the Career Options Resource Center at Hampshire College. Welcome to the recording of To Be a Writer, which is the kickoff event for the Hampshire Writers Advisory Council. In this recording, you'll get to meet 6 out of the 10 Advisory Council members, and they'll tell you a little bit about themselves, what they studied at Hampshire, what their path was like to becoming a writer, and what they're doing today. They'll also share a little bit of advice for you as a writer who might be just starting out. At the end of the recording, there's a question and answer session, and there's some really rich discussion there, so I hope you'll stay for that part. Enjoy the recording.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brett Martin. I use he and him. I was at Hampshire College a really long time ago, fall of 1989 through January of 1994. So over 30 years now, or coming up on that. What I studied, I had a very classic Hampshire education as far as it was, at least back then, where I did a very, very broad multidisciplinary education with literature and history, sociology, and then I was taking a whole bunch of classes about sort of how to apply that, and then did several large independent projects, hopefully synthesizing a bunch of that education into independent work. So I did some theater, I did some fiction writing. I was among the very first students there sort of officially doing creative nonfiction. I did a one-man show. So I was involved in all these various forms of storytelling, drawing on this multidisciplinary education. I have no idea what I imagined I would do for a career, I'll be honest with you. I did go to graduate school for fiction writing afterwards and very quickly gave that up. I know that I got out of school, moved to Northampton, and couldn't get a job. So I almost immediately applied my Hampshire training and started freelancing. And it occurred to me, sort of preparing for this, that the story of my Hampshire education is in many ways the story of what I've done since then, which is largely write for magazines and other kind of commercial outlets. So I wrote a book about television called Difficult Men. I write long form nonfiction for magazines. I'm a food critic, and I've done some radio work. So I'd say that the particulars of my career don't really exist anymore in some ways, but there's some basic tenets that I learned at Hampshire that I feel like are still applicable, and are the things that will put almost anybody sort of above or forward in their career, and that is curiosity, self-motivation, the ability to see connections between different disciplines, between different parts of the world, the confidence to pick up the phone or whatever you do these days in order to say, hey, I can do this because I've done this independent work before. As I say, those are sort of the skills I've used ever since then. And even though the landscape of the commercial landscape has changed so dramatically, it seems to me that if I had one takeaway, it would be use those skills. And also ideas win out still, is my experience. Your ideas, your what you're bringing out into the world, a good idea finds a home, has been my experience. And I think that is true sort of regardless of what the landscape may be about actually how to make a living doing this. So I will leave it at that for now, but happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Hey, so glad to be here. So I'm Chen, he, him, his. I was at Hampshire from fall of 2007 to spring of 2011. I studied creative writing with a focus on poetry, which was what my Div 3 ended up being. I also took classes on a lot of other things, like as Brett said, broad, multidisciplinary approach. So like Russian literature, sociology, multiracial US literature, some history, Mandarin language. I also did a 5-college certificate in Asian American and Pacific Islander studies. So what I imagined, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for a career, though I knew that I would always be a writer in some form or another. So I just wanted to keep that alive. And these days I continue to write poetry, sometimes creative nonfiction as well. And I teach creative writing now, mainly poetry at Brandeis University, and also for these 2 low residency MFA programs at New England College and Stone Coast. Some key points. Let's see. Yeah, I got to work with some really amazing writers and scholars at Hampshire. These include Polina Barskova, Heather Madden, Kimberly Chang, Rachel Rubenstein, Deb Gorland, Arcel Skamai, really, really amazing teachers. Always remember workshop and committee meetings in Emily Dickinson Hall, EDH. There was one afternoon I was in Gurmai's office and we just had the longest conversation about purple, just the color, whether we liked it as a color, whether we wrote in it when we wrote by hand, whether we used purple pens. I brought in a poem that sort of went into a bit of like etymology and also history behind production of purple. I also got to take classes with Martina Spada at UMass Amherst, and I remember they just gave his students so much permission to write about the subjects we were really passionate about. So I can remember just realizing that I could get braver in my writing, in particular when it came to writing about immigration and class and queerness. And my takeaway here would be to really find your writing community. Writing can be a lonely enough process, I think. Can be solitary often. And even though I enjoy solitude, introversion, and just time, with words, I think those are actually quite different from isolation and alienation. I think it's important to make that distinction. So I highly recommend, particularly that writers of color, check out, so there are so many organizations, such as Kabe Kanam, Kundiman, Kanto The Watering Hole, the list goes on, that can really provide that vital mentorship and community. Yeah, so finding writing community, really, really key. I'll pause there, but yeah, happy to answer any questions.
I'm Joanna Yaz. Shan, I studied with Martine too. What an amazing experience that was. I had no idea who he was, and incredible. My pronouns are she, her. I entered Hampshire in fall 91 and I graduated in spring 95. Like my colleagues before me, I studied a lot of different things, including creative writing, cultural studies, literature, photography, women's studies, film theory, and my Div 3 was a collection of short stories. When I first got to Hampshire, I don't think I had any idea what I wanted to do. But as I started getting really into creative writing, which I hadn't done too much of before college, I started thinking a lot about working in publishing in New York. The summer after my second year, I wound up doing an internship at a literary magazine in Boston called Plowshares, which I got from a binder in the Career Options Resource Center. Back before there was any kind of electronic database, I don't know what there is now, obviously, but it was literally a binder that I think said, literature or publishing on it. And there wasn't a lot. There were only a few, in the area in Boston where I was going to be, because Boston wasn't really the center of publishing. But I ended up at this literary magazine, and I ended up really loving it, especially having to do with how kind of grassroots the whole thing was. I walked into this scrappy little room. Plowshares was a very prestigious literary magazine, but was in this little room at Emerson College. There was two people there, very close to each other with boxes everywhere. And just seeing how this beautiful publication came out of this project that was worked on very closely by a small number of people really resonated with me. And without realizing it, I was actually starting my career, which I didn't realize at the time. My career has mainly consisted of editing literary magazines and books in New York City, exactly like what my 20-year-old self imagined, surprisingly. I worked for about 10 years at a publication called Open City, which is a literary magazine and book publisher. And then I moved on to NYU, where I oversee literary journals, teach creative writing, direct the summer undergraduate writing program. When I first started teaching writing workshops at NYU, I very much felt like I had no idea what I was doing. But I pretty quickly realized that I basically learned how to teach writing in the many workshops I'd taken at Hampshire and UMass. And it was kind of, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, because my whole career up until that point, I was using the tools I had gotten at Hampshire very closely, but it was a really cool moment to have this kind of clicking in feeling of remembering so clearly what it was like being in those workshops and hearing from my professors and from my fellow students, and then being able to apply that so directly to teaching workshops at NYU. In addition to working at NYU, I'm also the literary editor of Stranger's Guide, which is a literary travel magazine founded by Kira Bruner, who was in my class at Hampshire. And like Chen, I really have valued the literary community and the way my experience. I think one of the things I value the most, actually, about my work to this point is the way the literary community has led me to meet so many amazing people, and how it's really enabled me to stay connected to so many people from my past, including friends from Hampshire. Since so much of what we were doing back then was self-directed, everyone around me took their art so seriously. And this really showed me the importance of community and how enlivening it is to be surrounded by vibrant and creative people. So what I really want to emphasize is the importance of staying connected with one another. The people you're in the workshop with now could easily be your colleagues down the road, and that you can keep learning from each other and supporting each other long after you leave Hampshire.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet everyone. My name is Aaron Fagan. He, him. I started at Hampshire in the spring semester of 1994, S94. There was maybe 10 us. It was part of the entering class. Pretty intimate group. One of the first readings I ever went to on campus was at Dakin. There's a living room in Dakin, and Martina Spada gave a reading there, and it just took the top of my head off. That got my Hampshire experience started off with a bang. Let's see, I studied creative writing and philosophy primarily, world literature, world poetry, and lots of different philosophical traditions. Also took a lot of classics as well, ancient Greek drama, ancient Greek philosophy. Let's see. I guess I knew that I wanted to focus on creative writing when I was at Hampshire. And I mean, I loved Hampshire so much. I mean, my real dream was to return to Hampshire one day and teach there. I wanted more than anything to sort of go out into the world get some experience. And then I had this fantasy of returning one day and teaching poetry there. Didn't really work out that way. You know, I wanted to teach creative writing, but that just hasn't been something that's been a part of my path. After Hampshire, I moved to Rochester, New York, where I was born and raised. Worked as a machinist making precision parts in a factory for about a year, then worked as a carpenter and saved up some money, sold everything I owned, hopped on an Amtrak and moved to Chicago. I didn't have a job or an apartment lined up. Stayed with a friend for a couple weeks and finally found a place of my own. But I was literally going through the yellow pages, the physical paper yellow pages, went through the P section and came across poetry. I had read Poetry magazine at Hampshire, but I had never bothered to look where it was published. I just didn't think that that's a place that you work or that it had a physical location. It was just a magazine that I read. And I sent my resume to them, and I was invited to volunteer there. And then soon after, they started paying me. They paid me retroactively. They were happy with the work that I was doing there. But after the interview, the editor at the time, Joseph Parisi, handed me a stack of the magazines, and I didn't realize that I had just interviewed for Poetry magazine. It was quite a shock to me. I didn't realize that, but that was my introduction to publishing. Learned typesetting, proofreading, all the basic skills that fueled the rest of my professional life. I've written and edited for Nature, Scientific American, Aviation Week and Space Technology. I'm a poetry editor for Music and Literature magazine. And right now I've also worked as a communications manager for an arts facility, but so primarily I'm a freelancer now. I have 3 books of poetry published, and I just continue to do whatever I have to do to keep the fire alive for pursuing my creative work. Thank you.
Okay, I am calling from the luxurious confines of my car in a parking lot outside of a evening event for my job as a writer. So this is the kind of life you could have. So let's see. I have to pull up the questions here. So my name is Jessie Vendatuli, she, her. I was at Hampshire from F98 to spring of 2002. What did I study? I did not study writing at all in any capacity whatsoever. I never took a writing class. I studied women's health. I thought I wanted to be a midwife. So I had a big science background. And I also studied ethnomusicology with Jay Pillay. So that's my background. I always thought of writing as, there's my dome light goes off periodically. I always have thought of writing as like a means to an end of what I'm communicating rather than an end in itself in a way. And in a certain sense, I've kind of always undervalued it, I think, until fairly recently. I worked towards a master's degree in gastronomy. And so I worked as a freelance food writer for a while. And that's how I kind of got back into writing as a discipline. And then I did other things to make a living, running businesses. And I decided that I really wanted to write and make a concerted effort to do that. So now I write in the context of strategic communications and brand development. And it's fabulous. I really love it. It's a great way to use the discipline of writing to examine so many different topics. And the breadth and depth with which I think about the cultural ramifications of what businesses are up to right now is really interesting. And the degree of precision with which I use words every day, it reminds me of writing poetry, because every word choice has to be so carefully considered and is then torn apart by committee in 50 different meetings afterwards. So it's immensely challenging. It's immensely engaging. I make a really good living doing it. So I would encourage people to sell out if it's the kind of thing you can sustain, because it's a way, for me, it's been a way to use words in a creative way that supports my lifestyle, and I find it really rewarding. So I think that's one of the takeaways that I really that I have about it. And I've also had the pleasure of hiring my first other Hampshire alum as another copywriter in my agency. So that's been really fun also. So I hope I get to hire many more of the Hampshire community. Oh, and I need to get back to my work thing. So I'm going to jump off of the call, but if anyone wants to talk to me, please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to be in touch.
Evening, everyone. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing all right out there. Y'all good? I'm sorry, teacher mode just happened. Excuse all of that. I was about to say thumbs up. Let me see some thumbs up. Let's not do that. All right, so my name is Unique Robinson. I am a poet, performer, professor, all those things. My pronouns are listed in my display name. I use all of them. That's just a funky way to say it. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm back here in Baltimore, Maryland, but you'll hear about that winding road that I took to get here. So when I was at Hampshire, it was fall 2005 to spring 2009, really wonderful time, and really large pants I used to wear. And I studied creative writing and African American studies at Hampshire and throughout the 5 colleges. I worked at Cork. I worked at Career Options Resource Center actually for 3 years. So I was the flyer girl, the poster person, all of that. I did everything. So I also, in that time, I performed a lot of poetry. So I've been performing poetry since high school. And it was, really passionate. It was about justice. It was about growing up in Baltimore and not seeing justice and feeling like I needed to say something about that and couldn't stay quiet about it. So I kind of carried that with me to Hampshire with many of the injustices that I experienced there as well. Coming from Baltimore to a PWI was kind of a very jarring situation for me, but I found my community, found my people, and we all just sort of held each other down. And from that, my Div 3, I wrote a play. It was great. There's no record of it, but it happened. And what I thought I was going to do in Hampshire, I was a poet. I've always known I wanted to be a poet. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was going to make money. I just know I wanted to be a poet, right? And then somebody said, you have to make money too, though. Starving artist, that's a real thing, right? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I don't feel like starving. So, I became a community organizer, actually. While I was at Hampshire, I was involved in the reproductive justice field. The CLIP conference, that happened. I was always there. I worked with those folks very well. They wound up having a role in me getting my first job after graduating from Hampshire in 2009 in the middle of a housing and market and job crisis. I managed to get a job 2 weeks after graduating in New York City, in Brooklyn, working as a community organizer in the harm reduction HIV/AIDS field. So I was like, hey, I'm going to be a poet and an organizer. And then a year and a half later, I was like, I'm not going to be a poet and an organizer because I can't poet. I don't have time and energy for it. So I wound up quitting that job, as amazing as it was. and really showed me a lot of the things that I learned at that job I took with me for every other job I had after it. But I decided to go back to grad school. And I went to grad school in Mills College in Oakland, California, 2012. So I took about 3 years off between going to school again, and decided to just go with my MFA. I always wanted to go to Oakland, so I sort of used it as a way to be there and also get in this program. And, my mission there was to marry the page with the stage. I'm a spoken word artist, if you can't tell. So I wanted to learn how to really craft my writing on the page. And I learned that. And, I thought I was going to stay in Oakland. That gentrification said, nope, you're moving back to Baltimore. So I moved back to Baltimore 2015. Really great, amazing timing, because when I got here, I was working as a teaching artist. So I went from just being a poet to now you're teaching younger poets in high school and middle schools across Baltimore City via this nonprofit that a friend of mine, who I knew was a poet from way back, started a nonprofit here for young people in Baltimore City. Really amazing organization, Do More Baltimore. Long story, 30 seconds. So then from that moment, I also somehow met my 8th grade arts teacher, okay? And she worked at MICA, which is the institution that I now work at. So from that connection of just performing at the school, I now teach at the school. So for 6 years, I've been teaching there, creative writing, poetry, critical theory, and I also teach with K through 12 students throughout Baltimore City. I'm a host. I make music. I released my master's thesis like 2 years ago as a book called Four Wings and a Prayer. And the one thing I'd say is trust your vision and your process, and you'll find a way to connect all of these dots that seemingly don't make sense of all of your interests. They'll eventually do this and merge, and the road will be clear, and then it won't be, and then it will be again, and then it won't be again, and then it will. But trust all of that. That's all I can say to you. I allow room for evolution. Keep going. That's it, Paul. Thank you. Bye. Okay, I'm done.
So I want to open up the chat and open up the floor for questions, comments. I know sometimes it takes a little while to formulate your thoughts. So feel free to put things in the chat, or if it's easier to say it out loud, you can either use the little raise hand thing or just raise your actual hand like this, and I will call on you. Sadie.
Hi. First, thank you all so much for being here. I was really excited when I saw this. I just graduated for 2021, so it's been kind of rough looking for things, and I was so excited to hear from a creative community because I've been kind of stuck in my small hometown and been feeling a little lonely looking for my creative people again in a new spot. So my question would be about looking for work, but also trying to find new creative communities, and maybe how those two things can meet in the middle, or if it's better to try to separate out and say, hey, I got to do this professionally and do this creatively, and that's okay if they're separate. So any advice for kind of starting out, entering workforce, but also keeping up with like the creative passion that I want to keep fueling?
Yeah, Sadie, thanks for being here. I can imagine it's been a really crazy time to have graduated. And I graduated during a housing crisis. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but hearing what Unique was saying, and a lot of us, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Like there have been a lot of obstacles for a lot of us, and as much as it seems like it's such a terrible time and there's not a lot going on, I feel like things typically can like work out in some way. You just don't know exactly what that's going to be. But I just want to say that that's a great question and a great thing to be thinking about, whether or not it's better suited to you to have a day job that's related to writing or not. And I think only you know the answer to that question. And what's good about being young is that you can find that out. You might know very quickly after like 2 weeks of waiting tables that you're completely burned out and have no time to write. Or, the other way around, that you get an internship somewhere and that is, publishing related, and that it sucks the creative juices away from you. So I would just encourage you to try things. I would also say that, it sounds like you said you're in a small town, so there might not seem to be a lot of opportunities in terms of writing, publishing stuff, but I would encourage you to kind of open up your search in your mind in terms of like arts nonprofits or educational organizations, museums, even, you know, writing for a publications office, for any kind of company. You know, as someone who's now been hiring people for a long time, seeing all different things on people's resumes is always really exciting to me. And to be honest, often just seeing like office experience is really great. Just knowing that someone kind of understands how to be organized. So as someone hiring often for entry-level positions, I don't expect people to have a ton of experience. So I would just try to encourage you to take advantage of make use of whatever situation you're in. There are even, you know, writers now looking for virtual assistants. You know, there could be ways that you could do things remotely. One of the few nice things about COVID is that it's opened all of us up to using Zoom for much more than we ever knew was possible, because we didn't even have it. And so I'm hearing more and more about people in collegial relationships with people nowhere near where they live. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about this more, so you can contact me.
Thank you.
Jen, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just add to the online remote work piece of it. I mean, there's so many workshops and writing related events like readings, panels like this, right? They're happening online these days. And I see, local libraries and bookstores offering those kind of events. So that's a great place to, one, to get inspiration, to sort of keep the writing flame going, but also, for connecting, right, with other writers, with editors, with people who run libraries and bookstores, and just putting yourself out there in that way, I think can be really, really great. I think, just keeping an open mind about where that opportunity might come from. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, quickly, just a slightly different or related point. I agree that finding community is important and important for your soul as much as for your career. I will say that when you enter the professional world, you will encounter a lot of people who will do their best to convince you that they're doing you a favor by allowing you to be creative, and to be wary of that, and to not sort of lose track of your own value. So only you know what you can afford to do, etc. But be aware of that. That's an impulse, because this is something that you care about. There's a lot of people who will sort of take it, not even necessarily consciously take advantage of it. There's a culture of that, so just in drawing those lines between your professional life and your personal satisfaction, sort of be aware of where your value lies and make sure you hold on to that.
Thank you.
My question is around, the perspective of marketing yourself as a writer. I've been in the process of trying to re-envision my website, because for my div, I created a website because we weren't able to have an exhibit in the physical form. So I made it an exhibit virtually, but I have that website now as a space to kind of re-envision myself as an artist and what I see for myself as a writer as well. And so I guess my question would be around when you are writing and deciding what kind of work you want to put out into the world, what process do you go about that in terms of which works to put out, as well as how do you protect your work when it's out there? Because that's one of my biggest concerns right now.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
Hey, yeah, hi. So there's a very funny story that we'll share for another time, but Gia and I share very similar lineages, and being in Baltimore, going to Hampshire, it's a lot. But what I can say that I've learned since releasing my book is there's definitely a lot around who you're marketing to with your work, right? And I think what I express is who actually purchased the book were two very different situations, right? The book is very dear to me. It was about my family and the Great Migration and generations of tales and how, you know, the many various ways we were affected, but taught via, you know, poetry, of course. And it was really, I wrote it for, you know, young folks who looked like me who were dealing with that, right? But who brought it were white folks, right? Someone at Hampshire brought the book, who I went to Hampshire with, actually, Serena Himmelfarb, she teaches there now. She purchased the book and then read it to her class. So, you know, these things sort of move along in that sort of spiral. I do a reading at Humboldt County for an event that they had for Juneteenth, and then a lot of folks in Humboldt County brought it. So it's kind of like, once it's out there, right? You kind of don't have any say so over how it's received or with whom or who it's going to touch, you don't know, right? And I think that's kind of the magic of it, is you don't really, you know, you have a vision, but then it also can expand, right? And, you know, it can, your work can touch a lot more people than you think, right? In ways that we are not expecting that these connections sort of take place. So I guess protecting it is by just trusting that you know the reason that you're releasing it in the first place, right? Because if you're releasing it to just get, you know, as many books sold as you can, you know, you don't really care who it gets to, right? But if you're releasing it with the intention that it's gonna like do some good work out there, like, then that's really what it's gonna do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was at least my experience with that.
This is, you know, related, I guess, directly to what you're saying, but also sort of getting into some of the speculative territory. I think that the whole nature of publishing and the internet is something that's going to be completely transformed by blockchain technology in the years to come, in certificates of authenticity, using NFTs and smart contracts as ways to prove that you're the author of something. You know, it's going to be a new age, like a radically new age of publishing that we're entering into. So with those kinds of concerns about authenticity and maintaining copyright, those are all things that are changing quite a bit. I know for me, I use platforms like Instagram as a sandbox to just play with new poems that I've written, just to kind of test it out. There's a core group of people that seem to enjoy the poems that I make, and I can it's a kind of a reliable barometer for me to sort of get a sense of whether it's one that's working or not. And so, you know, I'll post it for a day maybe, and then I'll delete it. And then if it's something that I deem as worth keeping, I'll start sending it around to some publications, or I'll just put it on the back burner and keep mulling it over, trying to, I may or may not revisit it, I may just destroy it. But so social media can be an interesting sandbox to play with this idea of audience.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'll just add that in my experience with promoting work, yeah, I mean, like social media, but also in person, it can be a bit of a minefield sometimes. In particular, as a writer of color, and if you're writing about political issues in any way, you're bound to get not great like questions or comments at events, you know, touring with a book, or just fielding responses, say like on Twitter, right? And this is known, right? Like writers of color, especially women of color, receive harassment all the time online, right? And so I think it's important to some extent be, you know, as much as you can, like mentally prepared for some of that to happen, but also to protect your time and energy. So that might mean, right, saying no to a certain kind of event if it doesn't seem like you're going to get the support that you need, say from, you know, the organizers or just the kind of event that it is, or it's expecting, a ton of unpaid labor, for instance, right? And then with online as well, right? How you might really protect yourself in social media, on social media platforms. So that might mean muting or blocking people, or keeping, a smaller following, right? And there are pros and cons to that. But for me, it's been really useful and important to keep that in mind, so that you're not, I think, expending so much energy on responses to the work that really aren't about you or the work, but are rooted in racist assumptions or sexist assumptions. So yeah, I think just being aware of that is really, I think, will be helpful.
My first question is for you, Unique. I was wondering, as somebody who's also really passionate about supporting my community and helping my community as well as writing, I was wondering, how did you figure out how to intertwine those two passions of yours in your life's work whenever you were figuring out your career? And my second question was, let me see, how do I phrase it? For me, I read about sensitive topics, especially around mental health and mental illness, and then that's deeply stigmatized in the US and also in other places. And I was wondering, what does writing about, how do you manage writing things and then the people that know you reading them, and what does that look like for you, for everyone? But yeah, thank you.
All right, well, I'll kick us off. Thank you, Isabella, for that question. I basically, life kind of aligned it for me, right? I kind of had this idea that I was going to have these two separate worlds that never overlap. And I was going to get to do poetry on the side and be at slams and go to an open mic here and there and, make my name that way. But my professional name would never be, writer, right? I was kind of okay with the fact that I was just going to have to thug it out in the art world and have some other profession. And then when I went to grad school, when, me being a burnt out organizer just wasn't working for me anymore in my soul, I decided to do that. And I started to see the path in terms of teaching sort of open up for me a little bit. And then that became the way that I was going to, in a sense, serve the community, right? And because, I've always done youth work. Even when I was a youth, I was doing youth work and youth development and youth activism and all of that. So it kind of became a natural understanding that, oh, you're going to teach writing. Duh, ding, it was the light bulbs went off, right? And that was mostly when I got back to Baltimore, because it started to flicker in Oakland, but I was more so working in academic mentorship, teacher support roles. And then when I got to Baltimore, teaching became a reality. I had people tell me, oh, you need tenure, you need to have books published, you need all of these things in order to be, teaching at the professional level, right? So these are ways that people kind of shoot you down if you're not careful and not confident in what you're trying to do. And I'm going to get this whatever way. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know it's going to happen, right? So that's how it happened. Quite honestly, I didn't know. And then I sort of walked into it, right? So those things will happen too. And sometimes it happens when you're ready. Sometimes you're not ready and then you are. So that's the first question. And then the second one, my book was really, really personal. I had to, essentially a lot of confessional poems about a lot of stuff that I did that I was letting go of, right? In my 20s, and a lot of mistakes that I made, and my familial deaths, and the truth be told, the story of addiction and how it runs in my family continuously for generations of cycles of that. And that cycle hit me, right? So I'm my friends and family are going to read this book about my life and my struggles with this. And I was really scared. I didn't release that thesis for 5 years because I was scared. And then something said, you know what? If we don't talk about this stuff, we're going to be cloaked in our shame. And that didn't sit right with me after a while. It was I'd rather release it than hold on to it. And then when I made that decision, other people were I'm so glad you said this, because I needed this. I needed to see that other people are doing this too, so I don't feel alone. So that will happen too. So you'll be surprised who you're assisting with that. So, thank you.
Nicholas, I see your hand up.
Hi. So I have a question about sort of the content that a writer creates to make a career. So over the last 2 years, I've self-published 4 books through Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. And I also have a blog that I post media reviews on and a twice weekly serialization. So my question is, are writers better off doing a variety of works like that when pursuing a career, or would it be better off to sort of laser focus on one type of writing, one kind of interest?
Hi, Nicholas. Well, it sounds like you're incredibly productive if you've written that many books in such a short period of time. So I might give a different answer if you hadn't said that. But to me, it does sound like you're able to get a lot done in a short period of time, which makes me think you don't necessarily need to do so. I think if you want to, move to another channel, so to speak, and work on your next book and then send it to a publisher to try to get someone else to publish your work, that would be something to really consider. Not that there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, but at the same time, it might be interesting to see, how your work can find its way out into the world in a different way. But as far as writing different kinds of things, it sounds to me like it's working for you and that you're able to get all of that done, and having a blog and writing different kinds of things besides just fiction, to me sounds perfectly suited to you and to the lives of many writers. It's not the kind of thing where you need, the nice thing about the arts is that there's no, there is no science to it, and there is no exact way that it needs to be done, and no one's going to say, well, you've been doing all this other kind of writing, because it's all interconnected, and that you're polishing your skills as a writer with everything that you're doing. But I don't know. I don't know enough about your experience, but I would encourage you to think about sending your work for publication elsewhere, to magazines or to book publishers. I know that's not what you asked, but
that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I would sort of agree generally with that it's nice to sort of get that outside affirmation can be nice as well. I would also just say, don't overthink that. This is not a job. This is not a job that pays, that you're going into to follow a path that other people think you should follow. I mean, it seems like you're obviously self-motivated. You obviously have all these other interests. I would follow that. You didn't. That's sort of the great trade-off is you get to do, move in as many directions as you want. I've been a generalist my entire career. Early on, was told that I probably should choose a beat, and just didn't want to be perfectly honest with you. And it's worked out okay. I can't say what opportunities I've missed, but I do know that had I been looking for a job that had a very direct path to success, this wouldn't have been it to start with. So I would say you don't waste too much time worrying about that if you're already sort of on fire, as it sounds like you are, and just keep going.
I just wanted to make another comment that I felt was a little bit related to what a couple people asked, not to hog the time, I'm sorry, but just that I think what I'm forgetting who said it. I think echoing a little bit what Chen was saying, just about people, and Brett too. There are a lot of people who will maybe have something that you want, a book publication or reading or whatever, or an internship or a job. But at the same time, you're, as a writer, you're who those people need. And so to really maintain your self-respect in terms of, let me give an example. There's tons of literary magazines, right? You could send your work to 500 of them, and chances are some magazine would take your poem. Is it a magazine that you respect? Is it a magazine you'd really want to read? I would encourage you to use, be really careful, guard your work carefully, and think about the venues that you're publishing in and the places that you're reading and the book publishers you're working with that are really what places you want to be, and not just because they're the ones who said yes. I think there's this thing of like all these editors and these gatekeepers have what I want, but what they really want is you, meaning talented writers. And so just to remember that and empower yourself with that feeling.
Marlon, did you have a question, or were you doing the clapping hands?
Oh, no, I had a question, but Joanna kind of answered it. It was about like, how would I, because I'm writing a book and I want to know, like, how would I know if going through a traditional publisher is beneficial for me, or if publishing my book independently is better?
I would say try to find publishers who are putting out work that resonates with you as similar to yours in some way, aesthetically, or just the kind of fiction that you're writing, and take a chance. See what they need from you as far as submissions. A lot of publishers have different rules and guidelines, and try it that way. I don't think there's any reason not to. But just like I was saying about sort of empowering yourself and respecting your work, it should be a book publisher or a literary magazine, again, that you think is great. And that like deserves your work and not just the other way around. But I think there's no harm in trying to get anything published that you feel is ready to be published by a corporate publisher, an independent publisher, a literary magazine, whatever it is.
I just wanted to share an anecdote from grad school. I went to Syracuse University from 2003 to 2006 for an MFA in poetry. And one of my classmates, he was a fiction writer, and the faculty was very adamant to all of the students to not think about publishing. Don't worry about publishing. Focus on your art. Think of the long haul with what you're doing with your time here. It was a 3-year program. And that's what the faculty was advising, but the students were all frothing at the mouth to be published. And one of the fiction writing students was offered a 2-book contract with Random House. It was one of the largest first book deals in, it was over 6 figures, the advance for this book. And I had read his novel, his thesis, and it was a beautiful, beautiful book. Very quiet, simple story. And the faculty advised that if you sell your first book, make sure it's just for 1 book. Don't sell 2 books. Don't make it a 2-novel deal. He basically broke every rule that they were advising against. And once the paperwork was signed, they basically took that book and ripped it to pieces and turned it into some marketing monstrosity. It wasn't the beautiful work of art that it was before it went through the marketing mill. And, sure, he got that money, but, that's what, most of the working world, not me, but there are a lot of people in the world who make that much as an annual salary. I mean, you're not going to retire on, that kind of in advance. And there are lots of conditions that you might have to pay that advance back. It was not reviewed well. His second novel was rejected by them, so he basically had to buy it back from them. I mean, it was just a complete nightmare situation. So to me, the takeaway from that is, sort of the Beastie Boys line, be true to yourself and you will never fall. Like that, preserving that integrity, keeping your own sense of true north intact. And, there is kind of a constellation of advice that's coming through from people about like listening to the signals from your own life that are urging you forward. Be fearless in making mistakes and being a failure in the way that you experiment with your work and with your life. And your work will always honor the energy that you put into it, and it will carry you forward. But I guess that's the message that always came through for me, is that you have to be true to the work, and to be a good steward to it also, being careful whose hands you put it into, even if something looks attractive. So thank you.
Can I follow up on that question really quickly? Excuse me, and hi Aaron, I'm Boston, I'm in Rochester now. I don't suppose you're related to Garth Fagan?
There is some speculation.
Just been chatter. Okay, well, anyway, I didn't know. But anyway, so yeah, I guess you mentioned this about 2 book contracts. Is this something that's kind of intrinsic to these type of deals that they end up this way, or could you elaborate on that?
Aaron, maybe, hold on. I just want to say maybe you could put an answer in the chat.
Sure.
Because we're getting a little short on time. And Chen, did you have your hand?
Oh yeah, it was just a quick thing. This is going back to, I think, Isabella's question about writing about sensitive topics. And there was this wonderful reading and conversation with Danica Kelly, poet, that I got to attend recently. And a similar question was asked, and she just, I think, said this really wonderful thing, which was basically, in the writing process, remember that you can stop working on it once it stops feeling safe to you, right? And just having some awareness of like what your limitations are, right? And what you're willing to put in the work directly, right? That maybe could be indirectly expressed, so there are workarounds with that too. You don't necessarily have to, right? And I think this is also like an issue for many marginalized writers as well. The pressure to like market yourself through your trauma, basically, right? And so I would encourage you to resist that pressure. And yeah, you can stop working on it if it stops feeling safe to you. You don't have to publish it or show it to anyone else. It can just be for you as well. But you can also decide to return to it at a later point, right? She also recommended, if you can, working with a therapist and having that sort of going on at the same time. And I think that can be particularly helpful if you are going to have conversations like with family or real people that you're writing about, right? So that you feel equipped to do that, you have support in doing that, and it doesn't just feel like you having to have those conversations on your own.